And in many African countries, these outfits are formed on the basis of ethnic affiliation. Your typical African political party is simply an assembly of ethnicities. And in many African nations, you will discover that what we call elections is simply an ethnic census to determine which ethnic group is larger than the other. It is Julius Nyerere of Tanzania who said it. He said that the tragedy of Africa is not what the song is, not the song that is being sung, but who the singer is. And what he meant was very clear, that you may have an agenda that is good for your nation, but if you do not come from a particular ethnic group, those who will follow you will not be from your ethnic group. You may sing the best song, but when you look back, you'll discover that it's only people from your ethnic group who are following you. And when you have such a situation, the design is inherently conflictual. And that is why, therefore, when you look at Africa today, you discover that after every election cycle in many African countries, there is conflict. Because you go into the election, or the political parties go into an electoral process on the basis that we must win, and if we don't win, the elections have been rigged. In other words, we place so much premium on the presidency, and you'll see in many African countries, entry into government is like winning a lottery. It is winning a lottery because it gives you access to resources. And therefore people claim the president. If you are in a country, say, and one of your own means a son, they are normally sons. One of your own sons has won the presidency. The tribe celebrates, from the herdsman to the professor, from the fisherman to the intellectual, because we have now won the presidency. We have won the lottery. We will have ministers. We'll have all these, and everybody else feels excluded, and that generates conflict. And we have seen it, whether if we don't see it in Gabon, we see it in Guinea-Bissau. If we don't see it in Guinea-Bissau, we see it in Kenya. If we don't see it in Kenya, we see it in South Sudan. So that in South Sudan, if one were to ask them, what is the problem? The contest is of an ethnic kind. They are contesting because one of our own must occupy the state house. And that is why, therefore, you see, under the guise of democracy in a number of African countries, we create offices which are sinecures. You will have a president, you'll have a deputy president, you'll have a second deputy president, you'll have a prime minister, first prime minister, first second prime, all those useless offices which make no sense, because you have to appoint people into those offices and give them a motorcade so that when they go to their villages, they look important. And the people own them as ours. People want to be included. In such a scenario, my verdict is, number one, Africa's long-term salvation demands that we avoid adversarial politics. Africa's salvation demands that we define for ourselves what democracy means. In my view, I think that time has come that Africa must define herself. One of the problems that we have in Africa is that we do not define ourselves. And permit me to annoy you. In many African nations today, after every election, whether we like it or not, we have observers. And when the elections are being held, observers may come from Nigeria, from Kenya, from Uganda, but people are waiting. What did the European Union say? You know, this belief by us that the Europeans have a divine duty to tell us what to do, and we have a divine duty to accept to do what they say, is one of the problems that we have. And until the day that we liberate ourselves to decolonize our minds, in a manner of speaking, we are going to embrace the kind of politics that will only perpetuate conflict. Right now, as I move towards my conclusion, I simply want you to look at the map of Africa. And look at the map of Africa against the declaration that the guns must be silenced by 2020. and simply tell me, is there peace and calm in Niger? Is there peace and calm in Burkina Faso? Do you have peace and calm in Mali? Is it peaceful in Mauritania? Is it peaceful in Benin? Is it peaceful in Gabon? Is it peaceful in Cameroon? Is it peaceful in South Sudan? Is it peaceful in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Is it peaceful in Somalia? You look at the map of Africa and you look at that and you are being told through declarations that we are going to silence the guns in 2020. It's as if you are being told to go to Kigali, and meanwhile you have engaged a gear taking you to the Democratic Republic of Congo's border and you are on jet-like speed. This is why I think that it is incumbent upon us to remember one thing, that peace is not merely the absence of war. It is much deeper than that. That development is not building of skyscrapers in African cities, no. And that therefore, if we want to sustain peace and development, what we must look at are the human indices. I think the Bhutanese have got it right. What they call the gross national happiness index. These things that Europe tells us many useful things, but there are certainly useless things that they tell us. One of them is the thing called per capita income, that they take all the wealth, half of which is owned by two people, and then they divide it and say the per capita income is $800. And meanwhile, all other people are suffering. I'm submitting to us that time has come that we must define what development is. I want to go to a typical Rwandese village, and beyond peace, beyond the absence of war, I want to see peace at the dinner table. I want to see peace at the hospital and the dispensary. And I'm suggesting to us that politics defines all these. And one of the things that we must do, and Professor, I can't agree with you more, is that there is no one size fits all. There is no one size fits all. What works for Rwanda is not necessarily what works for Uganda. In 1984, the Ethiopians came up with a constitution which I think is the only one in the world that defines itself on the basis of ethnic identity, and even allows the ethnicities to secede under certain conditions. Whether it has worked or not, I think the jury is still out. But they recognize the fact that ethnicities are real. And if we continue to delude ourselves in Africa that ethnicities are unreal, we are cheating ourselves. Even the United States of America nowadays, when you hear them talking about the vote, they talk about the Hispanic vote. They talk about the black vote. They talk about the Caucasian vote. They are beginning to recognize that those blocks are critical. How then do you use them in a manner that is positive? Because look at the Democratic Republic of Congo with over 233 ethnicities. Look at Nigeria with over 200 languages. Look at Kenya with over 56. Look at Tanzania with 136 plus. These are the realities in the African nation. And I am convinced that going forward, number one, we need to have peace. But we will not have peace by declaring that peace will come and reign. We must do things that move us in the direction of attaining peace.
You know, when I was doing my undergraduate, there is this lesson which is called sociolinguistics. Yeah, I did some Bachelor of Arts in English and Literature. So there was this topic, this unit called sociolinguistics. In sociolinguistics is how language is determined by the society, or rather how the society uses language to its benefit, you know. Language is a mode of communication. So there's a specific interesting theory in this sociolinguistics. It is called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is very, very interesting. As you know, every theory has their own disadvantages. So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis states that the language we speak determines how we see the world. The language you speak determines how we see the world. So if I speak English, I'll see the world in an Anglo lens. If I speak French, I will tend to see the world in a Franco lens. You see, the idea goes that way. If I speak German, I'll see the world in a Dutch lens. It's true. This theory is true. The language you speak determines how you think. Yeah, that happens with the people who colonized us. They didn't only bring their language to us. Swahili is now almost being there was this proposition that Kiswahili was to be introduced into the African Union because it's a purely African language. Yeah, it also has some varieties with the Persian, Urdu, Portuguese, and all that, and also Arab. Now, Swahili was to be introduced into the African Union, but we still have some challenges with other countries. They still want to use English. No problem. But the problem is that we want to use English at the expense of Swahili, which means that we are willing to throw away our customs and accept other people's customs to be ours. Africans, we have our own values. Africans, we have our own customs. If we speak Swahili, we see the world as an African, as a Swahili person. You see, names of places, even here in Kenya, are named after white people. Lake Victoria, Port Victoria, what, Karen Blixen, what. Some of these names were later changed to African names. For example, Kisumu. Kisumu was not called Kisumu. It was called some Swahili name. I think somebody Elizabeth or somebody Victoria. Lake Victoria in Kenya is not called Lake Victoria by the natives. When you call it Lake Victoria, we remember the Queen Victoria. But it's no. The white people called it Lake Victoria, but we, the Luo of Kenya, we call it Namlolwe. That's how we know it. We don't know it as Lake Victoria. My grandmother calls it Namlolwe. My grandfather called it Namlolwe. My father calls it Namlolwe. My mom calls it Namlolwe. We have our own traditional names, but we are willing to throw that off to accept the English. We have our own moral values here in Africa. We Africans, we practice polygamy, but the white person does not practice polygamy. The white person practices something which is different. He practices gayism. Gayism came from the West. It came from the West, and it's still from the West. Africans with our own African values, we have said that gay is not part of our culture. It should stay away. We feel that when we speak English, we feel that when we accept things from the West, we feel full, we feel completed, we feel like we are there. No. The idea is one. The idea here is one. Don't throw away your custom and tradition to accept another person's custom and tradition. In fact, those people who are saying that West is the epitome of morality, no. The West is not the epitome of morality. You might be surprised to find that Africa is the epitome of morality. Come to think of it, all these bad diseases, the bad diseases. African people might be dying of hunger, but those worst diseases are from the West. They're not from Africa. Name it all. COVID, HIV, AIDS, what. Cancer was not part of African disease. It was brought about by the food people are eating, food from the West, the genetically modified food. That's how I know it. That's how it's been. Africans are the closest that we have to the original human beings. This skin color is not a curse. It's a blessing actually. It's something which is, God made us this way in order for us to survive. See where we are. We directly face the sunlight. So we had to adapt to this situation. So I don't think there's anything wrong with Black or Africa that we should throw away and accept other people's culture into us. No, we shouldn't. Africans, we should accept our own culture and tradition very well. If we want those other people, they should become secondary, not primary. Those other traditions, whichever you want to choose, should become secondary, not primary.
Conceptual West convinced us that our salvation could only come from something they call democracy. And I'm using the word very deliberately, something they call democracy, which they defined. And they defined it in English, if you are colonized by the English. And they defined it in French, if you are colonized by the French. And they defined it in Portuguese, if you are colonized by the Portuguese. And they defined it in Spanish, if you are colonized by the Spaniard. We never defined it in Kinyarwanda. No. It was never defined in Igbo or Yoruba. And we were told after the collapse of the Soviet Union that democracy was equals to 1, multi-party politics, 2, periodic elections, 3, limitation of terms of the presidency. That is how the conceptual West defined it for us. And we who have had the advantage, if it is an advantage at all, of being educated in the West, there is a sense in which our thought processes are also confined by those definitions. However much we want to free ourselves, we find our default mode being how we were trained. So when we define democracy, we are also caught up in this box. Sometimes we tell ourselves to think outside of the box, but the true north of our thought processes still remains the box. We never think without the box. So when we talk about peace in Africa, and we talk about adversarial politics, we are not talking about anything that is African. The political party is not African. It is something that we inherited. You know, in the United Kingdom, they talk about the loyal opposition, loyal to the monarchy. Because there is a process. Permit me to say at this stage that Africa deals with diversity much better than Europe. Much better. If you look at your typical European nation, the Dutch is the Dutch, largely. The Swedes are the Swedes, largely. The Norwegians are the Norwegians, largely. The Finns are the Finns, largely. And where they have many ethnicities, they don't do very well. Ask the Spaniards if you doubt me. Where they had many nations in Yugoslavia, ask them. They created many nations to create pure ethnicities. But African nations have succeeded thus far in working with diversity in very unique circumstances where the conceptual West, despite their protestation to the contrary, are always interfering in our affairs in a very subtle manner. When we are holding election, they will deny it. But there is a way in which they are always moving in a subterranean fashion. Because the thesis still is that you divide them in order to rule them. That is the thesis. We don't say it as loudly as we should because we want to be politically correct, and I refuse to be correct. And this is exactly what Kwame Nkrumah warned us about. And the political party therefore lends itself to that manipulation. We will be persuaded, because it is us who have gone to school who form political parties, we will be persuaded to form outfits. Kenya with over 56. Look at Tanzania with 136 plus. These are the realities in the African nation. And I am convinced that going forward, number one, we need to have peace. But we will not have peace by declaring that peace will come and reign. We must do things that move us in the direction of attaining peace. And until we introduce what I've called elsewhere hygiene in our politics, we are moving nowhere. And part of the introduction of hygiene is to recognize the environment and the context in which we operate. One of the areas in which we must move is to recognize that going forward, we are different nations in single states trying to create mega nations. And unless we have inclusivity so that people feel they belong. And I want to give this example. In Kenya, it happens, and I believe in other countries. When an individual is elected as a member of parliament, in many African countries, they have things they call homecoming parties. These homecoming parties is an attempt to demonstrate to the village by the newly elected member of parliament or newly appointed minister that we went to hunt. We have come back with a prize. That prize is membership in parliament or a ministerial post. Let us eat and celebrate. So that when you want to punish that individual, you are not punishing the holder of the office, but you are punishing the whole village. People own these positions. And I'm suggesting to us that politics must be of such a nature that allows ethnicities and groups to negotiate. I do not as yet have an answer, which I think I can pin on the ground, but I have the following things: that it cannot be uniform, that it must be specific to the circumstances of each country, that it is us who must define it, and that we must have a vocabulary for it, and that we must warn ourselves that the erstwhile colonial master is alive and well, subterranean and pernicious to the core. Don't delude yourselves. And remember that sometimes the disunity of Africa is big business. And if we forget that, we will once again be manipulated. Lastly, I saw the African National Congress winning an election in South Africa last week. Not that it's a bad thing, but somebody sent me a clip that was very telling. It was a clip where all the celebrants were Chinese, and they were celebrating Hail African National Congress Chinese in Johannesburg.
So let's talk about why Africa should embrace their own indigenous morality and governance, and we should stop relying on the set standards by the West. First of all, Africa's history is marked by a complex tapestry of cultures, traditions, and civilization that have thrived for thousands of years, not millions. However, the legacy of colonization has left a lasting impact on the continent of Africa, which is shaping our governance, our structures, and moral frameworks. In recent times, there has been growing call for Africa to reclaim its autonomy in defining its morality and governance systems, distinct from those imposed by Western colonial powers. Today we will be talking on the imperative for Africa to embrace its indigenous morality and governance, rooted in its cultural heritage and tailored to its unique needs and aspiration. So, first of all, we need to consider that there is colonial legacy and imposed morality that is set by the West. The West has become the false epitome of morality. I call it false for a reason, and here is why. The colonial era witnessed the imposition of Western values, moral standards, and governance systems upon African societies. European powers, driven by notions of superiority and domination, enforced their own moral codes and institutional structures, often at the expense of indigenous cultures and traditions. This imposition not only disrupted the social fabric of many African communities, but also perpetuated a sense of inferiority and dependency on Western ideologies. Another one is cultural appropriation and the loss of identity. So we didn't only lose our morality, we also lost our cultural appropriation and a sense of our identity. I told you before, Africans, we are quick to adopt something which is not ours and throwing away something which is ours. So about loss of identity, the adoption of Western morality and governance models has led to the erosion of African cultural identity and values. Indigenous practices deeply rooted in communalism, spirituality, and interconnectedness with nature have been marginalized in favor of Western individualism and materialism. This cultural appropriation has resulted in a disconnect between African people and their heritage. hindering the development of authentic and sustainable moral and governance frameworks. The third one is the need for indigenous morality. The African morality is really needed right now when everyone is moral. And when you see who is calling himself moral, you are left surprised, you are left mesmerized. So Africa possesses a wealth of indigenous wisdom and ethical principles that can guide its moral development. Drawing from diverse cultural traditions such as Ubuntu, Ma'at, and communalism, African societies have long emphasized values of harmony, solidarity, and collective responsibility. By reclaiming this indigenous moral foundation, Africa can foster social cohesion and promote justice and address contemporary challenges such as corruption, inequality, and environmental degradation. So another thing is tailored governance for African realities. Similarly, African governance system must reflect the continent's unique sociopolitical context and historical experiences. Western models of governance characterized by centralized authority and bureaucratic structures may not effectively address the diverse needs and aspirations of African societies. Instead, Africa can draw inspiration from its pre-colonial governance structures, which often emphasized participatory decision-making, consensus building, and decentralized authority. I told you there were so many, and also the last one, which is empowerment and self-determination. Embracing indigenous morality and governance is essential for Africa to assert its sovereignty and pursue self-determination by reclaiming agency over its ethical and political frameworks. Africa can resist neocolonial influences. Africa can resist neocolonial influences and chart its own path towards development and prosperity. Moreover, the revitalization of indigenous values and practices can empower African communities to confront social injustices, promote human rights, and cultivate sustainable development models that prioritize the well-being of people and the planet as a whole, as the home of mankind. To conclude, I would say that Africa stands at a pivotal moment in history. It's poised to reclaim its autonomy and assert its cultural sovereignty. By embracing indigenous morality and governance, Africa can break free from the shackles of colonialism and forge a future that honors its rich heritage and empowers its people. Through this process of cultural revitalization and self-determination, Africa can unleash its full potential as a beacon of resilience, innovation, and a dignity on the global stage. Yes, Africa, we shouldn't let go of our cultures. We should keep what is ours. Let us forget and let us throw away those things which came with the colonizer. They are long gone. We shouldn't face them no longer. They are things of the past. We should burn them. Bad memories. European is not superior to Africa. That's the main thing here. Preserve your culture, preserve your values. You know, we don't have to say, hey, what has the West said? What has European said? No. No. In this country, even my country of Kenya, the more fluent you are in English, the more you are praised. If you are fluent in Swahili, nobody praises you. But if you are fluent in English, everybody praises you. Hey, he's fluent in English. Hey, but if you are fluent in your mother tongue, nobody praises you. But if you are fluent in French and English, everybody praises you. Why is that? Why is that really? Why is that? We really don't love ourselves, really. You know, Plo Lumumba has said, decolonize the mind. The mind is truly decolonized. It's true. It's true. It's never been decolonized like this before. It's true. The African mind is decolonized. Is colonized, and we have to decolonize the African mind. So thank you for watching the video. Kindly do show your support and care by subscribing to the channel. Join my Patreon page, become a member. Give the video super thanks. I've said so many. Choose the one which works for you. I appreciate a lot, and see you in the next video. Remember to stay African. Remember to stay positive. Positivity is what we want here. Okay, stay African.